From my blood come the prince that was promised.
Hello, welcome back to another episode. The fourth episode of House of the Dragon delves more deeply into the relationship between Aegon's dream and the Game of Thrones prophecy about the prince that was promised. The importance of prophecy, dreams, and magic are being emphasized far more in HBO's House of the Dragon than they were in Game of Thrones. The significance of Melisandre's goal in locating the prince that was promised is given a new depth as it becomes clear that the Targaryens of the House of the Dragon are driven by fulfilling Aegon's prophecy. In the first episode of House of the Dragon, King Viserys disclosed the meaning of Aegon the Conqueror's prophecy, or the Song of Ice and Fire, to his daughter and new heir, Rhaenyra Targaryen. According to the dream, each Targaryen king and their heir would be burdened with the knowledge that a Targaryen would have to occupy the Iron Throne and bring the kingdom together in order to save the living from the cold and the night. Given that the Targaryen descendants, Jon Snow and Daenerys, united the living to battle the White Walkers in the last episode of Game of Thrones, the House of the Dragon's prophecy did indeed come true several centuries later. As Viserys realizes that Rhaenyra's sex scandal with Daemon puts her perception as heir in jeopardy, he reveals more to her about the importance of Aegon's prophecy. The king pulls out the Valyrian steel dagger from Game of Thrones, which is inscribed with Aegon's dream in High Valyrian. The blade reads, "From my blood comes the prince that was promised, and his will be the Song of Ice and Fire." The former part of the phrase now connects to the seemingly forgotten vision in Game of Thrones, which was the prince that was promised prophecy preached by Melisandre and the followers of the Lord of Light. The prince that was promised, prophecy explained. The Red Woman, also known as Melisandre, first mentioned the prince that was promised prophecy in Season 2 of Game of Thrones. The Lord of Light's followers will be saved by the predicted prince, who will emerge from salt and smoke, retrieve the Lightbringer sword from the flames, and use it to put an end to the shadows. Melisandre first thinks this figure is Stannis Baratheon, but after he dies, he starts to think it's the dead Jon Snow. However, because the High Valyrian word for prince employed here is truly gender neutral, the Red Woman travels to Dragonstone after being exiled from the north and learns about Daenerys and her dragons to inform Daenerys that she is the princess who was promised. Melisandre adds that Jon Snow plays an important role in the prophecy as well, suggesting the Red Woman came to realize that the prophecy was not entirely referring to one person. This is another point that clearly aligns with the House of the Dragon's newly revealed prophecy. Is Aegon's dream the exact same as the prince that was promised? The Targaryen, with the Song of Ice and Fire, who unifies the realm against the cold and the dark, is now shown as the prince that was promised in Aegon's dream. It appears that the prince that was promised prophecy of our lore and Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire dream are one and the same, since these statements from two distinct sources resulted in Jon Snow and Daenerys Targaryen destroying the White Walkers. The prince that was promised prophecy, on the other hand, differs from the other one since it is based on Azor Ahai and his relationship to Lightbringer and the Lord of Light. Game of Thrones prophecy also doesn't include any mention of the prince needing to be a Targaryen who sits on the Iron Throne, so it appears that while they are at heart the same vision, the various sources have some vital information that others don't. Aegon's dream does not appear to mention the prince that was promised being born among salt and smoke or wielding Lightbringer, as were the beliefs of the Lord of Light's adherents. These facts do, however, lend credence to the Targaryen identity of the prince and, more particularly, to the notion that two Targaryens will play a part in realizing the prophecy. Daenerys was born in a smoke and salt environment, whereas Jon is more attuned to the Lightbringer component. Given that both prophecies are written in High Valyrian, it is most probable that Aegon's dream is a continuation of the prince that was promised vision, which makes it even clearer that the Targaryens will carry out the long-standing prediction. How does Azor Ahai fit with Aegon's dream and the prince that was promised? While the figure isn't named in the Game of Thrones series, Azor Ahai is often associated with the prince that was promised prophecy in the books. Melisandre uses the two names interchangeably, as he was a legendary figure for the followers of Arlor who wielded the flaming sword Lightbringer and was said to be the one who brought an end to the long night. The prophecy said that Azor Ahai would be reborn again into a champion sent by the Lord of Light, which would occur after a long summer when a cold evil descended on humanity. The legend of Azor Ahai is thus another layer of the prince that was promised prophecy. Though not all support the idea of Azor Ahai per se, his prophesied reincarnation fits into being the one who is destined to stop the White Walkers. In terms of the sword that is used to put an end to the darkness, the story of Azor Ahai aligns nicely with Aegon the Conqueror's dream and the prince that was promised. Despite the fact that Lightbringer was supposed to be a sword, the weapon used to slay the Night King was actually a Targaryen dagger, suggesting that this element of the prophecy may have been inaccurate. Since Aegon the Conqueror engraved the Song of Ice and Fire dream on their ancestral dagger in House of the Dragon Episode 4, it is possible that he thought this blade to be Lightbringer, or at least his personal idea of the weapon that would vanquish the evil menace. Viserys reveals that pyromancers had used fire to place the prophecy on the Valyrian steel dagger, with Viserys and Rhaenyra placing it over flames to read it. Why House of the Dragon revisits the prince that was promised prophecy. Revisiting Game of Thrones' Prince That Was Promised prophecy recontextualized the original show while emphasizing the importance of destiny in this universe. It gives a more unified vision and purpose to the Game of Thrones series, particularly in how the Targaryens of generations past had been preparing for the moment that Daenerys and Jon would unite the realm against the White Walkers, and especially why it had to be them presiding over the army of the living. Jon Snow was thought to be the prince that was promised at the end of Game of Thrones, so Aegon's dream makes it far clearer that this was the case, but adds another layer in that Queen Daenerys Targaryen was also an integral part of the prophecy. The House of the Dragon reveals that this centuries-old prophecy was far bigger than the characters of the original series and makes the ending a fitting conclusion to the Targaryen dynasty. The significance of the prince that was promised and its connection to the destruction of the White Walkers was frequently lost throughout Game of Thrones. Aegon's Song of Ice and Fire prophecy represents everything in the House of the Dragon, but the prince that was promised prophecy ended up having little significance in the Game of Thrones storyline. Thanks for watching, and don't forget to subscribe.